I think what I wanted to also talk about now is you've said so many good points too. But for new beginners, what are some of the key principles? We've talked about the opening, we've talked in the middle. Now let's talk about the end game. What are some of the key things that you want people to keep in mind when it comes to the end game? That's very important, especially for new beginners to learn this, or even talk about some of the mistakes new beginners end up making. I know for myself, I'm very eager. When I see an opportunity to make a checkmate or a check, I'm going straight in. I don't care what it is. I just like I like the sound of check. It just sounds good to me.
It's so satisfying.
It sounds like I'm making progress, but sometimes, most of the time, it's a bad idea. So talk to me about that also.
Sure. So in the end game, one of the biggest pieces that people overlook is your king. Your king during the opening, as we understand, you want to get into safety as quickly as possible, right? So if you get your king to safety early, we're taught quite happily that you should be safe and content with your position. As long as you're not castling into an extreme attack in this position, white has a very comfortable time. Their king is safe, their pieces are developed. In the end game, we take away all these people. If we take all of these pieces away and we just have the kings, the main factor that is going to distinguish the game is the king. Your king is an extremely powerful piece. Although he is weak during the game, during the opening and the middle game, during the end game, the king is practically your most important piece to use for your attack. And typically you'll see whoever can get their king closest to the center will be able to win because they will have more command over the game. And that's something that beginners don't think about often, is in this position, a lot of beginners will just throw pawns. Instead, use what you have. Your king is not just a weakness. Your king is a fully powerful piece. Yes, you have to be careful. You have to be aware of checks, checkmates, and all these other things. But if you can learn how to use your king, you will see yourself winning so many more endgames than people of your level, especially at beginner.
How do you use your king then? Because there is, like you said, double-edged sword about if you expose your king, you might get checkmated, and that's what the opponent is looking for. So how would you, obviously you said move to the middle, well, how else would you make sure to use your king in the correct way?
Using your king is all dependent on how many pieces are on the board, right? If there's still queens and rooks, the heavy pieces as we call them, if there's still queens and rooks on the board, you're back here and your rook is next to it. You're trying to stay safe.
Yeah.
But in a position where there's very little on the board, right? If there's no sufficient material to be able to checkmate you, for example, if there's no rooks or there's no queens, let's say white has a knight and black has a bishop. In this position, your king is going to be a vital piece. Whoever can use this to control more of the board, more of the important parts of the board, being the center, but also, let's say black has pawns over here. Do you think it's smart for white's king to be hiding in safety, or instead be over here trying to stop this attack?
Absolutely.
Right? Trying to stop the promotion.
Absolutely.
It's very important. So use your king in the end game. That is crucial.
Absolutely. I think that's so fascinating too. What are some of the others, not just in the end game, what are some of the other mistakes that you've seen beginners make very early on? There's some of the mistakes that you even made early on that you had to kind of mentally get over.
Sure. I think most beginners suffer from this idea of one move threats. You always need to consider your opponent's move. And if you don't consider your opponent's move, then are you actually playing the game? Realistically, if you just want to throw pieces on a board, play a bot online, right? Lose to a bot online or win against a really low rated bot. But if you're actually trying to play a game of chess against somebody, you always need to consider what they're going to do. So if I make, let's say I make a threat to you, right? Let's just bring out the pieces. If I make a threat to you, white needs to think, what can black do?
Yes.
If white is thinking that they can just get 2-3 moves, then that's not going to happen. You always need to consider what your opponent is going to do. And if in a position you can make a threat that has no good response, then incredible. But you always need to think about the response.
And how many moves you mentioned making thinking ahead? These are some of the questions that, everyone always asks people. I'm sure Casper and Magnus Carlsen are rare many times. How many moves should you typically think ahead when you're playing a game, especially if you're playing against a human being?
It's all dependent on the position. If you're in a really sharp position where everything looks like it might just blow up, then sit down and try to calculate as far as you can. But you also need to remember that the further you calculate, the more likely you are to have made a mistake during the calculation.
Of course, yes.
Right?
Yes.
It's a very simple concept, but it's something that people really overlook. And one of my close friends, he will sit down, he'll calculate a lie. He'll go, oh, yeah, no, but I see something. And he'll calculate 6, 7, 8 moves into the future. And then by move 2, I'd already completely thrown his calculation out the window.
Yeah, of course.
And it was because he didn't consider all of the available ideas for me. He was thinking, well, this plays into what I want. This is of course what I want. If that were the case, then white would checkmate in 3. Right. That's just how it is. But being able to calculate well, I would say it's more important to calculate correctly or as accurately as possible for 2 moves than get a rough calculation for 6. I'd always focus on the accuracy instead of the volume. Because if you get it wrong, then you're in unfamiliar territory and you might have made an extremely unsound set of moves thinking that your attack worked.
Sounded good in your head.
Exactly. Yeah. It sounded good in your head. Again, paper tigers get burned.
100%.
So
100%. Okay. Also, I always wanted to know, what is the balance between studying theory and studying games? So obviously, as a chess player, there's loads of books about chess. There's loads of books about theories of chess. It's evolved so much. You probably think the person you're going to play with understands those rules and those theories too. So how do you balance like studying that and also watching tournaments and watching some of the great players play?
For me, mostly, I really love studying opening theory. But again, there's a level that opening theory isn't going to help me all the time. And if I, let's say I go and study this 18-move line in the French defense, and my opponent plays the Sicilian, my preparation is almost null and void.
Yeah.
Although it might be helpful for the French, now that I'm in completely unfamiliar territory or less familiar territory, then the only thing I have to go by is my intuitive feel for the game. And so I think for most people, it's a lot more important to understand, to get your general understanding before diving deep into theory. Study games. Look at, not even just games of grandmasters, but go lower down the ladder. See what people of all levels are playing. See how you can improve on other people's games. See without an engine, and that's a very important part. The current world chess champion, Gukesh Tomaraju. I'm going to butcher that 4 times, but either way. So Gukesh, he's incredible. He's an 18-year-old world champion. The youngest world champion of history, which is phenomenal, right? And his coming into the world championship was impeccable. And he had an incredible time, an incredible tournament. He did not use an engine up until he was 17 in his study. And he's the world champion at 18. So if you're looking to get better at chess, the engine isn't always the way. The engine is very, very scarcely the way. Instead, you should be evaluating everything yourself, right? So studying these games is crucial, but don't just pull up Stockfish. Don't just pull up an engine and go, oh, but of course this works because of 16 lines of Stockfish. We aren't of the level. We aren't of that level because we aren't a 3800 rated computer. That it's incredible how many people try to say, oh, but in this position I was better because Stockfish said so. Okay, and what did you play? How did you lose?
Exactly the point, which is what matters in the end, right?
Yeah, like many things that come across badly on the engine are very often some of the hardest positions to play. If the engine says that you're better in a certain position, but it's extremely easy for me to play, extremely dynamic for me, and you have one move for the next 10 moves to figure this out, to maintain your advantage, as the engine calls it. Otherwise you fall to being down. I'm going to win 99 times out of 100, because you're not a chess engine. And it's the level where, when Kasparov was beaten by Deep Blue in 99, I believe it was 99, people would think, is this the end of chess? No. It is absolutely not the end of chess, because the human element is what will keep the game alive. There is no way for us to be able to understand the game of chess like a supercomputer. And that's what makes it so beautiful.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. And I think that's so true. And I think that's actually sparked the thought in my mind too. It's like, can chess be beautiful? You've mentioned that, of course, you believe that. But can the game of chess, can a series of sort of like moves or a specific like match or a specific point be beautiful? And, you talked about us not being able to imitate engines, but I think there's one person in the world who's basically a walking engine.
He is a walking engine.
Magnus Carlsen.
Magnus Carlsen.
You talk to me about Magnus Carlsen, what makes him so great, and also like how for you chess can also be beautiful to watch.
Sure, I'll go briefly into the Magnus thing, and then I'll go to the beauty. But Magnus, across all of the top chess players, the one thing that is consistently said is that he just has an understanding that trumps everyone else in the top 100. There is nobody who feels and sees and breathes the game like he does. And he is known for taking proven drawn positions in an endgame. There's a lot of games, a lot of positions in the endgame are just proven draw. Like, theoretically drawn, and you could play it out 100 times and you would get a draw with perfect play. He's like an anaconda. He will squeeze and squeeze and squeeze until there's a break. And then he pounces on this incredible advantage that comes from nowhere. And he's the only player that's been able to do that to that level. And that's where he gets his up on the rest, his foot up. He is the best endgame player we've ever seen. And the endgame is, of course, an extremely important part of the game. Opening, middle game, of course, are as well. But if you can turn a drawn endgame into a winning endgame, even 30% of the time, you're winning so many more games than the rest of your peers.
Absolutely.
Especially at the Grandmaster level, because we have about, I think the amount of games that are drawn at Grandmaster level is above 50%.
Because both of them are just so good, they're not going to make a mistake.
Absolutely. There's also this fear of losing rating and getting lower in the ladder and all of this, but that's a completely different story of why Grandmasters draw so much.
Yeah.
But if you can be as deep in the understanding of chess as he is, then absolutely you're going to be the best.
Do you think he's the greatest chess player of all time?
I think he's the best talent that we've seen. I think as per the world of chess and a game of chess, Kasparov is my favorite, and he will always be my favorite. I think he is unreal, beyond belief. Of course, you have some incredible honorable mentions where you have who's the best attacking player being Mikhail Tal, who was, he was known for his brilliant sacrifices and his just incredibly beautiful play, which I'll touch into in a second. And he almost revitalized what we called the Romantic era of chess. Romantic era of chess was played about between 16 and 1800 mostly, is what it's considered from my understanding. And it was in games of basically all of the games that you would see would be extremely unsound gambit lines that would be hyper aggressive, hyper attacking, and brilliant sacrifices everywhere, just throwing pieces, whatever it may be, but a very romantic, a very beautiful, a very flourishing game. And that's where chess gets its beauty, is the Romantic era was when, had no engines, had no computers. It was all, also our understanding of theory was so limited. And so people would come up with incredible attacking ideas. And there was Paul Morphy, who was the guy of the Romantic era of chess. He was the face of the Romantic era of chess. And he was this very young American player during the 1800s. And he was leagues better than anybody who he played with. More than Magnus Carlsen is better than the world's number 2, about 5 times over probably. But at the time, he got bored of playing chess, moved to Europe to play chess, beat everyone in Europe, went back and turned 18.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
He was that good.
He was that good. 17, he moved across, did everything from what I remember, beat everyone, all of the best European chess players. Went back to the States, got a law degree, and then unfortunately had a bad run-in with chess later in his life where he actually got relatively mediocre, or the rest of the game stepped up with him, as it were. But if I would recommend anybody look at any game of chess to understand how a game can be beautiful, I would recommend the opera game. The opera game was played by Paul Morphy in an opera house against 2 people, against a duke and somebody else who I can't remember. And it was the most beautiful romantic game where he sacrifices his queen and all of this stuff and gets this brilliant checkmate just with 2 pieces. And it's absolutely incredible. But to watch something like that, you feel the art that comes behind it, especially because there's no theory at this point. There's no real deep, strong theory of chess. And you just understand, like, wow, this guy, he was alone in his brain and he figured this out.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me.
Beautiful, beautiful. I think that's so true. I think that's an amazing point we make about the fact that chess can be beautiful. And I think when you have that intuitive understanding of it, it's super clear. Okay, now I want to make a shift towards, we've talked about chess, the baseline of chess, give us people some amazing tips and principles and guides. I want to now switch to see how we can link it to life lessons. I think when we speak a lot of the times, that's the definitive kind of similarities that I see. You'd be talking about chess and my mind would be racing about all these things that apply to life. So in the book, How Life Imitates Chess, Kasparov says something, and I want to quote him. So I'll get a quote. He goes, "Strategy is a roadmap and tactics are the steps you take on that journey." I think he was comparing, obviously, when you're playing chess, obviously having an overall strategy of where you want to go, and the tactics, the moves that you make within that, And so not to lose sight of that strategy is important, because sometimes you don't have the moves and the tactics. It's fair, but you always keep on the strategy. And the question I had when I saw that was, how do you make a kind of a guideline, or how do you still move with your strategy even when you don't have enough information? So how do you, taking it from chess but bringing it also to life? How would you, kind of suggest to people to continue to follow that strategy even when their tactics don't have the information that they need?